Yo, 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 what is going on, IK Familia? It is your boy BN, aka Mr. Kingdom Builder, giving you, as always, that good on the regular when it comes to information and education on playing Kingdom Builders, right? We always like to try and preach having good, realistic expectations when you're doing anything in these types of games, and I'm here to always talk about everything and anything that has to do with this genre. Okay. Today, a little bit of some drama llama that we're going to touch on, and in a more of a conservative way. Before we dive in, as always, make sure you guys sub to the channel, give us a thumbs up, and of course ring that notification bell to get updates when we have new content coming out. Okay, we're going to touch on a couple things here. This was some topics that were mentioned, or posts I should say, that came from the Contention of Legends event channel on the official IK Discord. There were a few posts here that I just wanted to touch on for clarification because I think it's very important that when you are posting something, and you are posting something as though it is fact or it is truth, and you have essentially anyone and everyone that can read those posts, it is very important that you provide either clarification on this is your opinion or that it is fact. Right, and you know, you're hopefully speaking, because keep in mind, most people when they post things are usually posting them in a statement form. They're not usually going to be providing, they're not going to provide the statement, then do some italicized thing of, you know, here's my support, like, you know, here's my supportive evidence, you know, and then it's going to be, you know, just dot, you know, that, and that's going to be your under comment below your main post, right? No one does that. So that's why I think it's really important that when we talk about things, we should really do it from a position of we have enough knowledge and enough experience to make this call, not just isolated incidents or isolated experiences or situations we've been in. And so I'm going to touch on a few things here. Let me start with, first and foremost, this comment that Tickler from S38 made, where he says S97 was incentivized to be a war server. This is true. S97 was essentially incentivized to be a battle competition-based server. You can see that based on them just creating this icon for Contention of Legends. They have the content creators here, the different factions, the colors. They even give you this cool custom map. And I like this because I think it sets a foundation for what preparations we could see happen in the future of the game, utilizing something like this, maybe for SVS, maybe for Throne of the Supreme, for TOTS, right? These are really cool things you can look at, but they designed this with that in mind. Then we look at the second one here, which is that it's more unbalanced than it was expected to be. Now, I respectfully disagree, and I'm going to explain why. So, if you remember when S9 came out, right, a little history lesson here, S1 through S8 are the beta servers. When S9 came out, that was when global release was official for the game based on the current regions that had access. Then, the second global release was upon S94 through S97. That was when the newer regions that just got released to came in, right? That's like your Hong Kong, your Taiwan, your Macau, I think a few others as well. I don't have everything memorized off the top of my head. And then eventually India's going to come, right? So you're going to have like a third global release. Now, when this happened, IK back in S9 did something a little different. What they did is they prepped servers on the back end. And by the back end, what I mean is if you go here to the global list, what they essentially did is imagine this is S9. Or let me see if I can find S9 real quick. It might take me a minute. I think I have to go a little inside. S8. Okay, so you have S9. What they did is they released S9, but they prepped S10, S11, S12. They prepped a few more servers because they were expecting to have to release servers on a shorter interval based on all the new incoming traffic. The only difference this time around is that they prepped S94, 95, 96, and 97 all ahead of time, right? They just opened 4 servers up right away instead of opening one server, shortening the interval opening time, and then opening another server 24 hours later and at 24 hours again, however, whatever the interval was that they did it back when S9 was released. They just had these 4 servers already open and ready to go so they could populate players into them however they decided to go about doing that. So from there, and then you look at, you know, and let's dive this a little bit deeper, right? some players feel that S97 was a little more unbalanced than it was expected to be. If you asked me, I would tell you this was completely within my expectations of what I was already anticipating S97 to be. Why? One, because you have a brand new influx of players, and there's so many players in a lot of those Asia-based regions and countries that just play games and play kingdom builders. You look at other kingdom builders, look at how many of those players from those regions play those games as well. And then you have the number two, which is that S97 is being promoted as the first kind of cross-faction competition-based event. It's going to garner more interest than 94, 95, and 96 just because of that. Along with content creators being there and promoting it, right? It's kind of a triple threat at that point. So to look at the server, the way it's playing out, right, and I'll give you an example here as well, look at the rankings. Where we go and we look at alliance power. The top 5 alliances are all red, right? Green is supposed to be a new region coming in, and then blue, right, kind of represents the NA regions, right, for current players that are more or less playing it, right? You got the Worthy Princes, you got the Omniarchs, you got Clash with Eric, Clash Bashing, I think, in Norverse, a few others, right, that are coming in. But still, 14 mil, right? They're almost 12 mil, sorry, now 12 mil above, I guess, right? So when you look at the leaderboards, when you look at the new servers being prepped, the new regions coming in, new content creators coming in as well that are promoting it, again, this is just all within expectation to me, right? So, which is why, even in some of my videos, you heard me talk a little about this going in. Okay, now let's dive into the next topic, where Tesaria says, how would you compensate this dead time while we can't jump nowhere with castle level 8 or less? Can you make space portal items to jump with servers available, or level 8 or less would be great. So, what he's referring to, or what I should say is this player is referring to, we don't know if it's boy or girl, got to be gender neutral, is that when you come over and you look at the server, they actually turned off the ability for you, and this started with S98, and it also, or what I should say, with S98, because we already knew ahead of time that 94, 95, 96, and 97 were not going to be accessible to jump on. We already knew that ahead of time. But when you look at 98, that's when everyone thought it was going to be turned back on, and it was for a brief amount of time. Then they turned it off, and it has been turned off. Keep in mind, the newest server right now is 102. You can see that here. We are pleased to announce that Norham 102, 01102 is open. You can see this was posted 2 days ago, Saturday, October 2nd, right in the morning. Now, when you look at all of that, along with where we're at now, right, why do you think they probably turned it off? Well, again, we can speculate, but the idea here is that they turned it off. In short, right, so I can get onto a few other topics, is that you have you have a lot of new players that are coming into the game from another region. You probably don't want them to have an initially turned off experience from jumpers that are coming in, especially with your new launch. I will just say this briefly, and I'll probably expand on this in a future video. I just really think that is a little short-sighted, and I'll tell you why I say that. Is because you have new players downloading the game and installing it every day. It doesn't matter what region they're from. And because of that, up until server 94, you've had jumpers in servers 93 and newer since the game began. Right, or not? I shouldn't say necessarily since it began, but basically since global launch. Let's just conserve it to that group, right? So you've had what's 9 minus 93, 6, 84? You've had 84, 85 servers that you've constantly been having new players come into, and some of them being jumpers. Obviously, with the later servers, it happening more as the trend is catching on, as this is pretty standard and typical when new kingdom builders come out. At least that are seeing levels of success like Infinity Kingdom and others are in their early stage, right? This becomes a normalcy. Where was the worry about those players? Where was the worry about those new players and those new servers? More so than or as equal to what we're seeing now with them turning it off, right? What is the worry there? And for me, that's the question. Right? It's not to say here we know and to bash IK about it. No, not at all. It is simply to ask the question and look at the evidence and the information that we can go off of and say, look, in my opinion, I think they just should have left the feature on. There was nothing stopping them. All they had to do was just keep opening new servers more and more. I mean, you already knew that Chronicles were going to get pushed faster as well in servers 94, 95, 96, and 97, and even 98 and after, right? So the window of time that jumpers are going to have in those newer servers is just inherently going to be less. It's not going to be the same as it was when you had server 93 and before, because you already had kind of a standard flow of players that were coming into those new servers. Again, that's just my thought. I'll probably expand on that in a later video. But then let's move on and talk about another thing which kind of gets into a little bit more on the jumping topic. And I thought this was interesting to cover, which someone, Deathmate, said here. Also, why should jumpers that destroy the first experience of players be compensated? And then a few other people chimed in. This is a very confusing perspective. Fairy says, these are my feelings too. I feel like S38 was pretty lucky because we didn't get any jumpers. We got one notable one. And even still, he had way more influence than he should have. S85, where I jumped to with my jumper, it's really free to play and has little to non impact. Is under heavy influence of jumpers, but luckily nobody abuses it in power. It's power, and we coexist pretty peacefully. And so, again, right, you have some comments here. And then let me see here. He says, and then we have, right, I'm kind of against jumping in general. It seems like things are better without them entirely. I can understand the ideal of jumping too. I don't blame them. It's just a mechanic. I think the game would be better off without it. Right, Tickler says jumpers can have a positive aspect and more stability, but they just take away from learning as a group. So there's a couple things I want to touch on here on the second half here of the video. The first one is, let me talk about destroying the first experience. Why should jumpers that destroy the first experience, right? The way that this post is worded is though it is a fact. And technically it's not a fact. Right? You could reword this and say, why is it that some jumpers can or could destroy an early experience for new players coming into a server be compensated? Now, I don't know where they're being compensated, if it was something that someone said, and maybe that's what he's replying to. But what I would say is that keep in mind, right, just like a jumper, you could have a new player that just decides they're going to spend a bunch of money and go rogue. It doesn't really matter if they're a jumper or not, right? The only difference is that people that are spending can get farther ahead if they're spending on a jumper going into a new server, but it is within certain conditions. There's no reason to just make a jumper to make one. I did touch on this in a previous video, but I do want to say this to reiterate for anyone that hasn't watched that video, is that you should not be making a jumper account just to make a jumping account. There's more benefit and more return on investment for you just making a new account in an older server that is already established. Or in any server, arguably, right? Older preferred just because there's more benefits there. But in any server that is already established, right, and then also going off the age of the server. Those are the most important things. The only reason you should be making a jumper for the majority, and I just really personally myself feel that it should just be applied to everyone across the board, is you really should be making jumpers to join a big group. So that way, when you land in your final server, you will have the highest percentage chance of stabilizing that server and providing the foundation and management that that group is looking to put into place. Also, with the big asterisk here, understanding that not every group is the same. Not every group is going to have the same ideals, the same types of management, or the same type of server goals that they're looking to embed within that server and for its player base. Those things can change. You could have a group that wants to go into a server and they just tell you that the top 3 alliances are going to have all the capitals. They could tell you that it's going to be free for all PvP on the entire map, every kill event. They could tell you that anyone can PvP anytime they want. It's a free-for-all 24/7 like 7-Eleven. Get your freak on. Okay? No. The point is to just have good realistic expectations, right? And know that not everyone's going to manage the same way. Different project leads are going to most likely think differently on certain things. Not everyone's going to have the same ideals, right? So when you watch content from me, understand that this is just one way that I speak on enjoying doing things this way because I feel that there's certain pros and cons and benefits to doing it, and that's not to take away from what anyone else is doing. But let me, again, re-dive back on, right? Keep in mind, a jumper, the only way a jumper or a jumper group is going to ever ruin a first experience is if they're just going around and taking everything and attacking anyone and everyone on day one. That is less about jumpers and more about the player's approaches, or that group's approach, to a new server they are joining, right? Keep in mind, even if you're a free-to-play jumper, anyone that spends, even if you're a consistent spender on a brand new server, you're eventually going to catch up to any of those jumpers, right? Especially if they're free-to-play. That's never going to change. So anyways, let me move on now to the next thing here, which some people talked about. It was notable that they didn't get many jumpers. We got a notable one and had more influence than he should. I'm not sure. I don't think there was any clarification here. The other thing, let me see if there's something else that I can touch on. I thought there was one more topic I wanted to. More stability. Does more than the jumpers money-wise. Okay, so I think O'Ferry said learning as a group is the best part. Things can take many different directions too, but starting out and having your whole future as a server predetermined is boring. That's a boring server story too. Okay, so the thing I'll touch on here, at least on this comment, because there have been some others that have shared a similar thought process, is keep in mind when you say learning as a group is the best part. Remember, in my opinion, that's an extreme overreach, right? When anyone says that, because when you go into a new server, if there's no jumpers in there, it's essentially you as an individual alliance and a bunch of other individual alliances. No one is grouping. No one's coming to the table and being like, yo, let's all join in on this think tank and sit around this TED Talk table and figure out how we're going to best learn as a group. No one does that. I've never seen that happen in any Kingdom Builder I've ever played. Out of my 100, 200 plus, almost 300 plus accounts now that I have across multiple Kingdom Builders, I've never seen that happen in a new server. Right? Now, that is just because when you are starting in a new server, most of the time, it is leaders that are individual players with varying levels of experience and knowledge. Not everyone is going to think to themselves on day one, hey, let me go reach out to other leaders and talk to them, get everyone in a group chat or get everyone in a Discord server and kind of ask people, hey, what do you think about this, this, and this for the server goals, or just what are your thoughts on how to approach it? Trust me when I say, the majority of players do not do that. And when I say the majority, I mean 99.99% repeating. And you can repeat that infinitely. Most of the server, like the only time I've ever seen people do that, and I'm going to say this with a light margin of error, is for any groups that have been a part of my jump projects across the ones I've done across 2 Kingdom Builders now. And then maybe a few more I can count off my hand. And this is just from my personal experience. Most players, right now keep in mind, if you watch my content, you watch my videos, you most likely understand the importance of reaching out to leaders early on. But I can tell you without a shred of doubt in my mind that I most likely, if not am, the only content creator in the Kingdom Builder genre that has ever come out and consistently told players and informed players, I shouldn't say told, but informed players on what those benefits are of reaching out, why you should reach out to players. You can go look at any other big content creator that's out there. And again, this isn't, as I always say, it's not a slight. It's about how to realistically approach these types of games with what I feel is by far above and beyond the most important type of information that Kingdom Builder players really need to know. In addition, I would say first and foremost, but then also in addition to the type of progression-based content that you see, information on just how to progress your account, event-type information, right? That is always necessary. But it's important to recognize how, when you're building a server in a kingdom, how things that you do can have impacts, they can have rippling effects, why it is that maybe a server or a kingdom doesn't play out the way it does. And I just don't think it's responsible for us to kind of blanketly label these things without having a good understanding first and foremost on how they exactly work and what the actual true impacts are. Now, from that, let me see if there was something else here. Yeah, I thought there was. Okay, so I think Deathmate said here is that the main problem of jumpers is that you can compete as free to play with low and mid spenders, which obviously shouldn't be the case in this game. When I jumped, we had people immediately fearing that our server turns into a wild chaos dominated by jumpers. Luckily, it went out peacefully. So, personally, I don't think it's that you can over compete. Is that of jumpers is that you can't compete as free to play with low and mid spenders. So the thing is keep in mind the point of jumping is not to compete with anyone. The point of jumping, really, if you're looking at like what's the biggest benefit of jumping? The biggest benefit of jumping is, as I said previously, getting a big enough group to go into a server and stabilize it so you don't have to worry about any rogue players or people that are going to, people that would arguably ruin the experience for other people, right? And most of the time, that is under the fundamental trend that the majority of players in every server do not just want to have an all-out war in a server from day one. The majority of people will never want to do that because the majority of players are usually new players, and new players do not just want to constantly be getting attacked or constantly doing attacking in their first kingdom builder or in another one that they're initially trying out. The majority of players, that may not be the same for a smaller minority or a smaller group, but the majority of players, that is how it always is. That's how it's always going to be. When players have a good understanding about these trends and how new players come into these types of servers and games, you will have a better expectation and approach going forward, whether you are an individual going in solo, a couple friends, a small group, half an alliance, a full alliance, multiple alliances, or a jumping group in this case, or even migrating, whatever it may be. But again, keep in mind, that is the main point, the main takeaway there when you're jumping, right? You're not there to compete, you're there to stabilize, right? As far as when you're going in as a group. If you're going in as an individual player, then you might have your own ideas on what you want to do there. So, right, and then they say when I jumped, we had people immediately fearing that our server. Now, part of this is true. I have heard from some players that when jumper groups come in, right, especially if they're well organized, and an example of this would be like what we did in 97, what we did in 36, and what we did in 8, but most notably 97 as of late, because things have thankfully stabilized and we've been able to actually reach what we wanted to try and reach back in S8. Now, for that, you're still going to have players. It doesn't matter. You could be the nicest group out there. You could do what we did, where we reached out to the top 100 alliances across the first week 2 to 3 times. We informed them. We did a couple other rounds after that as well, letting them know, hey, we're not here to hurt anyone, right? Please let your members know, right? We had this nice 2-part message, which is about 950 characters between the two, just kind of laying out what our goals were, how we wanted to work with everyone, how we wanted to share with everyone, right? If you were a leader of any of those alliances in the top 100 going into the first week, and you informed your players, and then all those players read those mails, right, they would know. And of course, that's not accounting for every single player on the server, but the majority of the players that are active from the top alliances going into that first week, they would have known. And then whenever we followed up with them again later, that we were not there to do anything. But that takes time. That takes a lot of work that you have to put in if you truly care about building a good rapport with your player base, the leaders and their management teams, right? It's not like you're just going to come in as a jumping group and now you're done, right? You don't need to do diplomacy. You don't need to take additional steps and put some real work in, put some real time in to develop your server. Right, this is why it's so important when you have jumping groups that just, it's funny, and I'll tell a brief story. Is I had this situation happen to me in my previous Kingdom Builder, where I got known for making like back-to-back jumps, but a lot of people would jump with me again, and a lot of players would re-jump with me because they knew that my projects were going to be, above and beyond more professionally organized than anyone else that was doing a jumper project at the same time that I was. And that was mainly because of the amount of work, care, and passion that I put in to every single project in order for it to always be the last, right? The intent for doing a jumper project is never for you to continue or to keep doing them back to back. It's to have it be a one and done situation, right? That's how you should always go into it with. Now, as I got known for doing these, I would have other project leads that would come to me and they would ask me questions. And I'm not saying every single one did, but I would get this often. I would have other leads that would come and ask me how I did things, get advice. I would even have other people that said, hey, I'm interested in starting a jumper project. Can you give me some tips? Or, hey, when are you going to do your next jumper project? And I would always tell people, like, my hope is to never do another one. And anyone who ever asked me that question, you know, I'm sure they can easily share a screenshot because that's my pretty standard typical response to anyone that ever asked me something like that. So again, I think just having a good understanding, as I'm sure I'm being repetitive at this point, is what I always ask players to have, right? Before you comment on something, before you make a statement or you make a post and you're writing it as a statement that could be interpreted as a fact from someone else reading it, right? Add something in there that kind of states that it's your opinion, unless you have the necessary amount of knowledge and experience to make a statement like that. And, you know, you maybe you just come off saying, well, hey, this is one scenario that I've seen happen. Instead of sometimes what we often see players doing, or just people in general, is they'll make a statement, or I should say some people in general, that will make a statement and there's no additional context to it that makes it seem like that's their opinion or this is one way of doing it. It's more of, no, this is just the fact, right? And when people read it, they can read it as such. Now, that's it for me. Again, I know we touched on a couple things here talking about COR, a few pieces there. We talked about jumping and some expectations going in. Let me know what you're thinking down in those comments below, right? Do you agree? Do you disagree? Do you share a different opinion? I would love to know. I know we talked a little bit. I love doing these deep dives and conversation pieces. Whether you can listen to these as a podcast, you want to watch it and follow along. I always try and over-explain, even if we are going through some of the transition pieces from in-game to then on Discord, even if you are listening to it as a podcast. So I hope people at least appreciate that when I am able to, and of course I remember. But that's it for me, okay? So until next time, we'll catch you later.